Every emotion you experience is a voice from the depths of your unconscious, an ancient, symbolic language through which your inner world speaks. Emotions are not random, they are purposeful, meaningful, and intelligent. Anger may erupt when your integrity has been compromised, when your soul feels that something essential has been violated. Sadness might arise when you have drifted too far from what you love, when something precious has been lost or neglected. Fear could be a signal that standing at the threshold of your own growth, challenged to leave behind the familiar and step into the unknown. Yet most people respond to emotions with resistance or suppression. They push them away, noob them, or react impulsively without reflection. But Carl Jung teaches us that doing so only deepens our fragmentation. What we resist persists. What we suppress returns in darker forms. The true way forward is not to dominate emotion through sheer willpower or denial, but to recognize that these emotional waves are not enemies. They are messengers from your inner self, pointing you towards something unhealed, unseen, or unrealized. When we treat emotions as masters, we become enslaved to their every rise and fall. We lose control of our decisions, our relationships, our sense of self. We are dragged through cycles of reactivity, consumed by feelings we barely understand. But when we begin to view emotion as a guide, we reclaim our power. We step into the role of the observer, the conscious self, who can listen, decode, and respond with wisdom rather than impulsivity. To control your emotions is not to silence them, but to listen to them without becoming them. It is to say, I feel this anger, but I am not this anger. What does it want me to understand? This simple act of questioning creates space between you and the emotion. A sacred space in which transformation begins. It is here that self-awareness is born. It is here that growth becomes possible. Jung believed that emotions were the raw material for personal transformation. They are the fire that tempers the soul. The more we attend to them consciously, the more we uncover the deeper structures of our personality. They become tools in the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. So the next time emotion visits you, don't push it away or let it drive your actions blindly. Instead, invite it in like a guest. Ask it what it has come to teach you. Honor it for what it truly is, a sacred message from the unconscious, offering you the chance to evolve. That is how you become the master of your emotional world, not by force, but by understanding. When you say, I am angry, or I am afraid, you unconsciously merge your identity with a fleeting emotional state. But emotions are not who you are. They are temporary visitors. To identify with them is to hand over your inner authority to a passing storm, allowing your sense of self to be defined by something that is constantly shifting and inherently unstable. Carl Jung warned us of this dangerous fusion between the ego and emotion. The moment you believe that you are the emotion, you become trapped within it. Your vision narrows, your thoughts distort, and your behavior becomes reactive. You lose the power of conscious choice and fall under the spell of the unconscious forces within you. This is when people lash out in anger, collapse in despair, or make decisions rooted in fear that later bring regret. Not because they are weak, but because they've forgotten that they are not the emotion itself. The truth is, emotions are experiences, not identities. You are the one who experiences anger, not anger incarnate. You are the one who feels fear, not fear personified. There is a vast difference between saying, I am afraid, and saying, fear is arising within me. In the second case, you've already begun to create space between your higher awareness and the emotion itself. That space is where power lies. That space is the seat of your sovereignty. Jung's psychological work emphasized this detachment not as a means of escape, but as a pathway to mastery. The ego must learn to observe rather than absorb. Emotions should be acknowledged and examined, but not allowed to define the self. When you witness your emotional reactions without fusing your identity with them, you initiate a process of individuation. You begin to become whole. This inner witness, the quiet observer within, is your true self. It is untouched by the turbulence of emotional waves. When sadness rises, it observes. When joy erupts, it watches with peace. When anger flares, it remains still, curious, and grounded. Developing this inner observer allows you to respond instead of react. It gives you the wisdom to act with intention rather than compulsion. To not identify with emotion is not the same as emotional detachment or cold indifference. On the contrary, it allows for deeper emotional intelligence. You become capable of holding space for your feelings, processing them fully, and learning from them. without being consumed by them. You can acknowledge grief without drowning in it. You can hold anger without becoming destructive. You can face fear without collapsing into paralysis. This level of mastery does not come overnight. It requires awareness, patience, and compassion toward yourself. But every time you say, "This is something I feel, not something I am," you chip away at the illusion that you are your emotions. And with each moment of clarity, you free yourself from the unconscious grip of your inner world. Carl Jung reminded us that the journey to wholeness begins when we learn to hold our experiences without becoming them. Emotions are important, yes, but they are not your identity. You are something far more expansive. You are the stillness behind the storm, the sky behind the clouds, the eternal self, watching it all unfold with wisdom and grace. There is a part of you that you rarely acknowledge, a part that lives in the dark corners of your psyche, hidden beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and denial. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the repressed, disowned aspects of your personality that the ego refuses to accept. And yet, it is precisely this shadow that holds the key to your emotional control. What we reject inwardly does not disappear. It festers. The anger you deny, the jealousy you suppress, the pain you pretend doesn't exist. All of it gathers in the unconscious and waits for a moment of weakness to surface. And when it does, it often comes out with more intensity than it ever would have if it had simply been acknowledged. This is why so many people feel overwhelmed by their emotions. They are not reacting to the present moment. They are reacting to the accumulation of years of repressed emotional energy, leaking out through the cracks of their false identity. Jung taught that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply the unlived life, the unacknowledged truth. It includes everything we were told not to be, everything we felt ashamed of, everything we decided was not me. But no matter how deep you bury it, the shadow finds its way to the surface. It may emerge as sudden rage, as emotional breakdowns, as sabotage in your relationships or work, or as deep, unexplained anxiety. These are not random malfunctions. These are the shadow's cry for integration. You cannot control what you refuse to confront. Trying to manage your emotions without facing your shadow is like trying to hold back a flood with a paper wall. The emotions that feel overwhelming are often messengers from the shadow, demanding to be seen. Real control, soulful control, comes from having the courage to face his inner darkness and listen to what it is saying. To do this, you must step out of denial and into radical honesty. Ask yourself, what emotions make me uncomfortable? What traits in others do I judge harshly? What parts of myself do I avoid or pretend don't exist? These questions point you toward your shadow. As you bring awareness to it, you begin the process of integration. You reclaim lost energy, you dissolve inner tension, and you create inner harmony. Integration does not mean acting on every impulse your shadow contains. It means understanding it, accepting its existence, and giving it a proper place in your conscious life. When you recognize your inner rage, for example, you don't need to act destructively. You can channel that energy into setting firm boundaries or standing up for what's right. When you acknowledge your envy, you can explore the unmet desires beneath it and use that insight to create a more fulfilling life. This is emotional alchemy, the transformation of raw, dark emotion to mature wisdom and power. Jung believed that true emotional control comes not from suppression, but from conscious relationship. When you know your shadow, it no longer controls you from behind the scenes. You no longer project it onto others, blaming them for the very qualities you refuse to see in yourself. You become whole, and in this wholeness, your emotions no longer overwhelm you. They become tools, allies, and guides. So do not fear your shadow. It is not your enemy. It is the doorway to your highest strength. Within it lies all the power you've given away. Within it lies your authenticity. And only by walking through that darkness can you truly claim control. Not the fragile control of repression, but the grounded, unshakable control of self-awareness and integration. This is the work of the inner warrior. This is the path of individuation. And this is how you rise, not by escaping your shadow, but by learning to walk beside it. Deep within the psyche lie emotional complexes, autonomous clusters of thoughts, feelings, and memories that operate independently of your conscious will. Carl Jung described them as splinter psyches, because they behave almost like inner personalities, each with their own agenda, emotional charge, and voice. When a complex is activated, usually by a trigger, a word, an image, or a situation, it hijacks your emotional state. You say things you don't mean, feel things that are disproportionate, and act in ways that confuse even yourself. This is the silent machinery behind many of your strongest emotional reactions. One moment you're calm, the next you're in a storm of rage, sadness, or fear. Why? Because a complex has taken the reins, pulling from past wounds and unhealed moments, dragging you into old emotional patterns that no longer serve your growth. Jung wrote, "Everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. And that is the true danger. Not just that you have emotional baggage, but that it runs your life without your awareness. These complexes are often rooted in early emotional experiences. Moments where you felt abandoned, shamed, unloved, unseen. They buried themselves in your unconscious, gathering strength each time a similar emotion or experience occurred. Over time, they formed deeply rooted emotional habits. You might call it overreacting, but it's not simply overreaction. It's an unresolved complex playing itself out again. To transcend the emotional complex is not about destroying it. That would be like trying to destroy a part of yourself. Instead, the path is to bring it into the light of your conscious mind. To observe it, understand it, and reframe its meaning. Only through awareness can you begin to reclaim your emotional freedom. The first step is recognition. Begin to notice your emotional overreactions. What situations make you feel disproportionately hurt, angry, or afraid? What kinds of people trigger you repeatedly? What patterns seem to replay in your relationships? These are signs that a complex is active. When you catch it in motion, pause. Observe it as if you were an outsider looking in. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Ask yourself, where does this come from? What is this really about? Next, trace it back. Often, beneath the emotional surge lies a forgotten event or belief. I'm not good enough, I'll always be rejected. No one truly sees me. These beliefs are rarely logical. They are emotional truths that formed in moments of vulnerability. But just because something was true for you once does not mean it must remain true forever. By consciously re-examining the roots of the complex, you begin to unbind its grip. Jung emphasized the importance of integrating complexes into the total personality. This means not denying them, not being ashamed of them, but recognizing them as parts of your psychic landscape. When you do this, the complex no longer needs to shout or act out. It has been acknowledged, and acknowledgement is the first step toward healing. As you integrate these emotional knots, something powerful happens. You begin to respond to life, rather than react. Instead of being pulled unconsciously by emotional undercurrents, you find yourself rooted in the present. You are no longer at the mercy of your past. You gain the ability to choose how to feel, how to act, how to live. This transcendence is not the elimination of feeling, but the maturation of it. Your emotions become more refined, more aligned with your present self, rather than echoes of old pain. You gain inner space. You cultivate emotional resilience. You no longer fear your triggers because you understand them. To transcend the emotional complex is to rise above the old patterns that once defined you. It is to step into a new level of consciousness where you are no longer a puppet of your past, but the author of your future. This is the work of true transformation, not to escape what has shaped you, but to master it through awareness, compassion, and courageous integration. And in doing so, you begin to feel something rare: emotional freedom. Not numbness, not suppression, but the calm power of choice, born from the depths of your own self-understanding. In a world that constantly demands motion, reaction, and urgency, stillness can feel unnatural, even threatening. Yet in the teachings of Carl Jung and in the depths of true inner work, stillness is not weakness. It is not passivity. Stillness is power. It is the grounded state from which all clarity, strength, and emotional mastery arise. When emotion flares, whether it is rage, sorrow, or fear, the instinct is to act, to speak quickly, to defend, to run. But what if you didn't? What if instead you remained still, not frozen in fear, but calm in presence, not empty of thought, but filled with deep awareness? In that moment, you begin to realize that stillness is not the absence of emotion. It is the conscious container that holds emotion without being overwhelmed by it. Carl Jung often spoke of the importance of reflection, of standing apart from the unconscious content of the mind, so that it can be seen, understood, and ultimately transformed. This space between stimulus and response, between emotion and action, is where stillness lives. And in that space, you are no longer at the mercy of emotional storms. You become the observer, the witness, not the reactor. You access the self which is beyond all fleeting states. The ego thrives on noise. It craves distraction, certainty, and constant motion, because stillness forces it to face what it fears, the unknown within. But the self, that deeper center of being, is nourished by stillness. It waits patiently, not pushing for control, but offering insight to those who slow down enough to hear it. When you practice stillness in the midst of emotion, you are not denying the emotion. You are honoring it by giving it space. You are choosing not to be swept away by its intensity. You are giving your inner world time to speak its deeper truths. Often, our first emotional reactions are not the truth, but the surface echo of something deeper, something older. In stillness, that deeper truth can emerge. For example, when someone says something that angers you, your first instinct may be to defend yourself or retaliate. But if you pause, if you choose stillness, you might realize the anger is not just about their words. It's about an old wound, a buried insecurity, a moment from the past that remains unresolved. Stillness allows you to see beyond the surface and choose a response rooted in understanding rather than compulsion. Stillness is also where intuition awakens. In silence, the unconscious speaks, not in words but in images, feelings. It is in the stillness of solitude, of meditation, of deep breath that new insight rises. A solution that was hidden in the noise suddenly becomes obvious. An emotion that seemed impossible to manage begins to soften. A sense of clarity, purpose, and calm strength takes root. Jung believed that the unconscious is always communicating with us, but we are too distracted to hear it. When you cultivate stillness, you tune into that inner frequency. You gain access to the wisdom of your dreams, your symbols, your archetypes. You begin to align with the rhythms of your deeper self. In a practical sense, stillness can be cultivated through daily practices. Breathing, mindfulness, solitude, even journaling. These are not escapes from emotion, but gateways into it. They help you process your inner world with greater clarity and depth. They remind you that you are not your emotions. You are the one who experiences them, and in that reminder lies freedom. When you can remain still in the face of inner chaos, you become unshakable. You are no longer pulled by every emotional tide. You carry a center within you that cannot be disturbed by the storms outside or within. This is the foundation of true emotional control. Not through force, but through presence. Stillness is not the end of feeling. It is the refinement of feeling. It is where emotion meets awareness, where pain meets meaning, where chaos meets calm. In stillness, you become a mirror, reflecting without distortion, perceiving without projection. You hold your emotions gently without being devoured by them. This is not weakness. This is mastery. This is power. Because the strongest form, the psyche, is not the loudest voice. It is the one who can remain calm, aware, and steady when all else is in flux. That is the voice of your true self, and it speaks in stillness. So, I urge you, not to suppress your emotions but to integrate them, to listen without becoming lost, to feel without being consumed. Remember, you are the observer, not the emotion. You are the soul, not the storm. Control is not about domination, but about integration. That is where true power lies. As Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Now awaken, and command your emotional life, not with fear, but with courage, compassion, and deep understanding. You are not your emotions. They rise and fall like tides, but the soul who watches them, that is your true self. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Emotions are the language of the unconscious. To control them is not to suppress them, but to understand them, listen to them, and transform them into inner power. Let us explore how.